Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis at the conclusion. So we're reconstructing and trying to understand all the context and all the different issues that were not completely finished by the Rebbe Rashab. So we finished the Maimer and Torah from the Alter Rebbe. The Maimer and its explanation, Mik Hashem Elokeinu Hamakbil L'Sheves Mashpili Lirois B'Shamayim Ba'aretz, and its explanation. And now we began the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, which is based on that Maimer with much more elaboration. And the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, we began on page 361, the beginning of the Maimer, and we're now on 362. I said the pages can be found all scanned at ayinbeis.com as well as in the group. So let's sum up what we learned. Again, these ideas will be familiar because we've learned them several times already. Firstly in Ayin Beis, partially, and then in Torah and Alter Rebbe's Maimarim, the beer of the explanation of the Maimer, the Alter Rebbe, and now again the Mittler Rebbe. But it doesn't hurt to see it, even refreshing ideas we've learned, but also with the Rebbe Mittler Rebbe's additions. And we shall, of course, compare it to the Rebbe Rashab's additions as he explains it in Ayin Beis, namely page 1350, 1351, 1352, and then returns to it again on page 1461, I believe. Just check when he comes back to Ner Mitzvah Torah, through the end of the Hemshech. That's the layout of the pages. Okay. So summing up what we've learned. And you'll tell me if the connection has a problem because I just saw a little note here on my screen. Okay. So he began with the verse, Mik Havaya Elokeinu Hamakbil L'Sheves, and began with Ner Mitzvah and Torah. That Mitzvah is compared to Ner, a candle, and Torah to light, and he explained the context. Because the candle of the Mitzvah is like a keli, a Ner, to the Oyer of Torah. So it's like an Oyer, it's a keli to an Oyer. Like he said, the Ramach, the 248 positive mitzvahs are like 248 limbs, divine limbs, and Chochmah, the Torah, is the Reish, and Mokav for all the Evarim, the mind, central nervous system, that encompasses all the parts of the body. Then we also have the second verse, that Neshama is also compared to Ner, and here too, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, that the soul is like a keli, a Ner to Havaya. Ner, the Neshama is a Ner to Havaya, which is the Ur. Keli the Ur, the Shem Havaya. Atater Neri. And the Mittler Rebbe spells out, L'cheira, we need to understand what are these two different expressions that sometimes Mitzvah is called Ner and sometimes Neshama is called. So from the fact they're both called Ner as Mashma, it appears they're like the same inyan. At the same time, they're also both called Ner. So they're both different entities. Why this example? Like why is a neshama dafka compared to a candle? And same thing with a mitzvah. And on the other hand, why don't you find the example of a candle used for other items or other objects? So to understand this, he said, let's preface and dissect the anatomy of a candle. And from the mashal, we'll be able to understand, we'll be able to understand the nimshal beruchnius. From the example and the details, we'll be able to understand how it is on the spiritual level. In the nefesh halakis of the Ner Havaya and the mitzvah, which is called Ner. And he continued and said there are two elements that are critical to create a candle. One is the great me'oras ha'er, for something to shine, for something to be ignited into light. And without that, it can't shine at all. And what is that? The oil, the fuel, and the wick. The wick, nishava min hashemen, it draws from the oil into the wick. And the fire, the flame that it generates and creates is so-called holding on to, being contained by the wick. So the wick is essentially serving like a channel, a conduit between the flame and the fuel and the shemen. So the psila sheyeves es Hashem b'psila oz yesibas v'adlokas ha'er b'psila zman rav, and that in turn will create and cause that we'll have a flame that burns for a substantial amount of time. Zman rav. Then he continues and says, for this mix to be proper, you need to have a psila that is of a certain sort. Like we know from he says that in the Yadua b'Mishnah Gemara, that a shemen that does not follow, is not drawn into the wick, ein madlikin by. You don't use it to light, like it says in the Masechta Shabbos and in the Perek by Mem Madlikin, where he talks about Ner Shabbos. The same thing with Ner Chanukah, that there are oils that you don't use. Because they're not fitting to be drawn into the wick. And that's where we stopped. And now he's going to ask a question. We continue from this opening statement. This is around the third down of the page, 362, if you're following along. And seemingly this is not understood, what we just said. The im iker hadlokas ha'er hu b'psila dafka. If the primary igniting or the primary burning of the fire, of the light, the igniting of that light, kindling it, I would say, the kindling of the light is in the wick, dafka. Sheteva eish l'kala is dover shenechas by. Because the nature of fire is what? Is to consume the object that it is contained in. Boy, ke'etz yavosh, like he gives the example, a dry piece of wood. Sha'esh hanechas by seiduf. I say machlo, machala, that the eish, the fire that is now being contained, holding on to the so-called burning the wood, it burns it and it consumes it. V'zewa nikra hadloka. That's what means a kindled fire. If the fire is not burning, so the thing is intact. The wood will remain intact, and that's that. But when there's a fire burning, the very definition means, if you define it in simple terms, it means it's consuming some object that's feeding the fire. And in the process, that object is being slowly consumed. He didn't yet spell out what his question is, but he's saying, so we're talking about the same thing with the wick. The wick is where the fire holds on to the wick. So also in any type of kindling of a fire, it's tafke with a psila. It's the wick that is the key thing, like the wood, in the example of the wood feeding the fire. Lama is v'imkein gambad lokazu de'er as a psila dafke. Lama tzorich shiyah Hashem and nimshach b'psila dafke. So why is it so relevant and important that the shemen, the oil, should be feeding the wick? I understand it's an obvious question, an obvious answer, but the Mittler Rebbe is phrasing it in the form of a question. So it's a rhetorical question, obviously. It's not because the answer, of course, is going to be because the wick alone is very negligible, and you need the oil for fuel. Like a piece of wood, that itself is like the fuel. You don't need oil there. The wood is like the oil. So he's going to explain this, but he's saying it nevertheless. In the style of the Mittler Rebbe, he dissects it because he asks also the fundamental question: who cares about the oil? The main thing is that the psila is serving as the so-called container for the light. Even so, why is it so relevant that the shemen be nimshach b'psil, like he said before, an oil that is not feeding the psila for whatever reason? It's polluted, it's too thick, it has too many additives, it has too many sediment, too much sediment in it. Why is that relevant here? Now, the truth is, if you learn the Mittler Rebbe's Maamorei, you come to discover these questions, even though they sometimes seem so obvious and the answer seems obvious, but the main purpose of the question is not for the moshel, it's for the nimshel. As we'll see, by asking the question this way, the Mittler Rebbe is setting it up to tell us the same thing, why the Nefesh Elokis is not enough to achieve the love of Hashem. You need the shemen of the Nefesh Abamis. If you remember in Torah, the answer to that is because the Nefesh Abamis adds Ma'oidecha, adds a whole level of power that the wick does not have. The wick is still a limited wick. L'chol nafshecha. So in other words, it's really the oil from oil matayu. I know I'm usually don't do this, but since we already learned it in Torah, I just want to show you how this question really is coming to explain why is the wick not enough in the nimshel. And there, it comes alive in a whole different way. But the Mittler Rebbe, in his style, is asking the question in the mashal. That, in other words, really what he wants to say is, what is the oil adding? Why it's so important for the oil to feed and to be drawn in, and that the psila, the wick, should draw from it. So he says, okay. So lamatzar sheyeh Hashem nimshach b'psila dafka. Why is the oil so important that the oil be drawn into the psila? Let's say the oil is not really being drawn properly. I'll take it a step further. Let's say the oil, they have very pure olive oil. Oil that works, like I said, a very good wick and very good oil will burn the best way possible. But let's say for whatever reason, the oil is not high grade. It's not a higher grade oil. It's a lower grade oil. And it's not going completely smoothly into the wick. Why is it so critical? The imloi, and he goes back further. It's not just that you can't use it. You're not allowed to use it. In Bamem Adlikim, by Ner Shabbos and Ner Chanukah, these are oils you're not supposed to use. The imloi, meaning if it's not flowing into the wick properly, ain't a mitzvah sadloka klal. Le b'ner Shabbos v'le b'ner Chanukah. You're not performing the mitzvah of adloka. We say the mitzvah is adlokas haneris, to kindle the flames. You're not b'kayim, not in Ner Shabbos, not in Ner Chanukah. So we see it's not just a side point that the oil go into the wick. It's critical to the mitzvah. So it's not just the psila on the fire, but also the oil that's feeding it is so vital to it. And here you see how the Mittler Rebbe is doing exactly what I said. He takes up a few lines, a few ideas of Alter Rebbe and develops it. You start appreciating far, far more than when you just learned it in Alter Rebbe. And most importantly, you see how grounded it is in Alter Rebbe. He's not adding any new fundamental idea here. He's just dissecting and developing the Alter Rebbe's concept of these three pieces of a ner, which is the fire, of course, and the wick and the role of the oil in what he's doing right now. Okay, so this is the operative question, and he's going to explain it right now. I'll just stop if anybody wants me to clarify any points about as I explained it just now. Any questions? So says the Mittler Rebbe now like this. However, he's now answering. So you have to say, however, we have to say in this matter, the ikar adloka b'shemen v'lei b'psila. From the fact that the mitzvah is so adamant that the oil has to properly flow into the wick, so you see, because hypothetically you could have the mitzvah is you light a wick. If there's a little oil, great. If it's good oil, good, but it's optional. Bottom line is you lit it. You can even make the argument that mitzvah is on the light and the kindling, not on the burning. So let's say it burns. How long will a wick burn if you light a flame? Not long, depending how big the wick is. It could take a minute. It could be a few minutes. It could be less than that. But we know now that the shemen is ikar. That's what he's saying. So you have to say the fact that it's likuv, the fact that the oil has to be one that flows properly into the wick, that the ikar hadloka hu b'shemen v'lei b'psila. That the mitzvah is not lighting the wick, but that you're using shemen to ignite, to kindle the flame. So it's not just a matter between the wick and the flame, it's also the shemen is critical. V'lei b'psila. Tahainu, which means masha'eru shoyev es hashemen b'psila. The fact that the oil draws the oil within the wick, in other words, the oil, the light that's burning, is through the process of the wick, of the oil being drawn into the wick, umachla eishe ma'at ma'at, and it consumes it slowly, slowly. It doesn't happen overnight. You know, the psila would burn out very quickly, but with the oil being drawn to it, it can be an extended period because it's slow consumption. Again, if there was only a wick and a flame, it would be a very quick consumption. But with the oil properly flowing into the psila becomes something else. It's not just a so-called arbitrary factor. The psila becomes like a pipe that's carrying the shemen and feeding the flame.
Mechale,
not machale, right? Mechale, correct. Mechale oise ma'at ma'at, and it slowly, slowly consumes it. Zeu ika sibus ikuv ha'atloka. That's the primary reason. He's explaining why the shemen is the ikar adloka, because that's the primary reason that the ikuv adloka means that the adloka is happening in a phased fashion. Ikuv literally means to hold back, but he means here that the adloka doesn't just burn everything out. That it's very phased and properly regulated. Ad she yichala hashemen yichala hadloka v'apsila. I'm sorry, to the point that the oil will be consumed, and that can take time. So in other words, it is getting there. There will be a point where the oil will be fully consumed, and then yichala hadloka, the hadloka, the light will also burn out. But what you've done is the shemen has caused a proper adloka, a proper kindling and burning, which of course, when you think of the menorah and the Beis Hamikdash, it wasn't just about lighting it was about it burning for a period of time. And there it's a ner tamid, with all the explanations what that means. A Hanukkah lights also, it's not meant to be just for the moment that you light it for 5 minutes. It has to burn a certain amount of time and so on. So what's the ikar adloka then? That really creates this regulated and phased consumption is the shemen, not the psila. Even though the psila is critical for the whole process, which we'll talk about momentarily, but it's the ikar adloka is the shemen. V'apsila nisheres kayemes built in the Sefes Klal. And now the other way around, which we also learned in the Maimon Alter Rebbe, what happens at the end when the oil gets completely consumed? The psila remains intact without getting burned up at all. However, this balance, this combination, so the psila remains intact. The oil completely gets consumed, but the oil, on the other hand, has caused this to be an extended period of burning. So what happened here is that the oil caused the psila to be able to have the light hold on to it, contained by it, for a long period of time. Zman rav, mitzad shohos, the ikuv, the extension. Shows means the amount of time that it extends. The ikuv and the regulation, or the what do I call it? The regulation, the phasing of and slowing down, or ikuv, holding back the kiloyin hashemen of the consumption of the oil shebepsila within the wick al yedei ha'er ki yadua. Al yedei ha'er ki yadua. So he's not adding anything new, he's just summing it up. So what you have here is that on one hand, the oil will be consumed, the wick will not. On the other hand, is the oil that creates the extended period of burning to the point that the oil gets consumed by feeding and by being drawn into the wick through the flame that's burning. Because obviously, if the flame is not burning, then both the wick and the oil would just remain static. They'd remain standing there. Nothing would happen. So it's the fire that obviously is the one that's feeding through the wick, is feeding off of the oil. So you see here a dissection of the mashal far, far more than the Alter Rebbe initially did, even though the Alter Rebbe also relatively elaborated on it in the beginning of the Maimer we learned. And as I said, I'm not going to take time now to compare. You can go back and compare it if you like to see exactly how one develops from the other. But that's what he says here. Okay, Kiyadua. The Kiyadua goes on the whole picture here. That this is like known, this is the way, this is the process, all in the mashal. Okay. Let's continue. So based on this, Iker hadlokahu ba'ir, the primary burning, you could say, of the hadlokas haneres, the lighting and the burning of the candle, hu ba'ir shemechala hashemen hanivla bepsila, that consumes the oil. That's hanivla is from the word like blia, swallowed up. That's absorbed, I should say. Hanivla, that's absorbed in the wick. Ma'at. Very slowly. Ve'ena psila rak kamay mamutza. And the psila is serving only as an interface, as a conduit, a channel. Lahovi ulachaber sa'er shaba, to bring and to connect the light that is burning from this wick, b'shemen hanivla ba l'chaleisam, in the shemen that is being absorbed in it, l'chaleisam, to consume that oil. So you have the oil, the wick, the fire, and that's the process. The wick is serving like in between these two. I think he's going to explain what happens if you only had the shemen. We know what would happen if you only had the wick and the flame. Wouldn't burn long. What happens if you only had the flame and the oil? I think he's going to talk about that. I think the Alter Rebbe also talked about that. But that's the point that he made till here. I see there's more, so let me continue, then I'll stop for any questions. Umasha Hashemen, continuing on. Nimshech acher apsila. So he's going back to remember that was the key thing, that the shemen, that's the condition, that the oil has to be drawn into the wick. If it's not drawn properly or not drawn at all, it's not the mitzvah of hadlokah, like he said before from Ner Shabbos and Ner Chanukah. So he says this, that the oil is drawn acher apsila, following and into the wick, the nidbak ba, and gets bound by it, meaning it's like before he said absorbed, now he says v'nidbak, because it's not, they don't remain two entities. The wick is now saturated with the oil, the kola, and in the process the oil gets consumed. Zehu ba aideha oir shebepsila. What's causing this consumption, this process, is the fire that's burning in the wick, the flame, shu shoyev es hashemen, which draws the oil. And that's why it's so critical. He's coming back to the original question. It's so critical that the shemen should be drawn acher apsila, v'yiyeh ha'er yochel l'seis esei ulechalesei, that the oil then can carry it and consume it. And now he's going to explain basically what happens if it doesn't work this way. Like we actually see with our own eyes, empirically. That when the oil is being drawn into the wick through the flame that's burning, the oil extends, continues, and becomes settled. He means it becomes like, the word tranquil may be the right word. It's like a peaceful light. It's burning properly. V'shoyev u'mechala la'shemen shabo ma'at ma'at. And it draws and consuming the oil slowly, slowly. And that's what causes. I know this sounds like he's repeating what he said before, but this is pretty common in Mittler Rebbe, that often he'll say something and then continue saying in different words a bit. It's just a style thing. But also, I'm sure if we look closely, we'll find some additions that he's adding. I don't see something that jumps out at me that he's adding that he didn't say before. But there are, the way he phrases it just adds more to the equation. And it's interesting, it wasn't just the way the Mittler Rebbe spoke, he also wrote this way. This is his own writing. This is not Hanocha. Torah is written by the Maril, the Alter Rebbe's brother. This is the Mittler Rebbe himself wrote. So he says, so this is the cause for I say the word delay, but the delayed process, I said before, the phased process. Ikuv Zman, Hadlokas Ha'er, the time, the extended time, the phase time, the regulated time that the light is burning, the Eina Seirif, the Kola B'Mehera, and doesn't burn and get consumed quickly. In other words, this is the condition for it to burn that way. You need all three elements, which of course explains also why the Hadlokas Ner Shabbos and Ner Chanukah is so vital to have all these points, because the key is to have an ongoing flame, not just a quick lighting a flame and it burns out. You want it to burn slowly and peacefully and calmly. Yeah. Because if the shemen would not be drawn into the wick, the ena nechaz rak b'psila, and you'd only have the flame and the wick, levad, only the wick, miyat kefetz umistalik, the fire would immediately jump and extinguish. Or shemachala v'seiref lepsila miyad. So either the flame would completely not be able to hold on and would just like flicker and then burn out, or it would quickly, immediately consume and burn up the wick because you don't have the oil feeding it. V'chein b'shemen levade leipsila. And now, what about the oil if you don't have the wick? Eina er sheyave. Then the oil, the flame that's burning through the wick, does not draw from it because there's no oil to draw. I'm sorry. If you have only the let's start again. If you have the oil alone without the wick, you can't. The flame has no conduit to draw from it. Try to light a flame just with oil, and you don't have a wick. So they have these experiments. You could do it for a few minutes, for a minute, very short, but it's not going to burn properly. So if you don't have the wick, the flame will not have anything to draw from. Elanishka, the cover b'miyad, it will be nishka means like shakua. It'll sink basically. It'll be completely consumed the other way around. The fire will completely burn out, the cover and immediately burn out. And you won't have any element that causes this to burn for a period of time. That's if you only had the shemen and the fire and no wick. So in other words, you need the wick and the oil for this to work properly in the way he's describing it. And here's how it works. Here's where it's the right way. Through the wick, where the oil gets saturated into it, gets attached within it, gets consumed, gets absorbed within it. He's using the word both nidbak muneches, meaning nidbak means nidbak means they're things that don't, in chemistry, they're things that are alloys that you can't combine them, and there are things that you combine. As we said, the halacha is that the oil has to work with the shemen hand in hand. If it's an oil that doesn't get absorbed properly, it's not good. So he's saying nidbak boy, and furthermore, muneches b'seiche. It has to be here. I would use the word saturated. It has to be contained. Muneches is like something that is placed within it. It belongs there. If the wick and the oil don't have that symbiotic relationship, you won't have what we're looking for. So he's saying nidbak bo hashemen, that the shemen has to attach, the oil has to attach with the shemen. As I said, certain oils will not be absorbed properly in the shemen, and it has to be muneches, like remain there for a period of time, for the whole process, or through this whole lighting, through the whole process, as long as it will burn. Shukamay mamutza, and the wick therefore is like the mamutza, the interface, the conduit, the channel, intermediary, lachaber ulahamshich ha'er, to connect and to draw the flame b'shemen in the oil. Ladlikoi ulechalese ma'at ma'at, to kindle it, to burn it, and to consume it on a slow basis, ma'at ma'at, ad sheyisakev zman ha'adlaka, to the point that it will extend the period of time of the burning of this candle. The nimtza. So what do we derive from all this? Shapsila v'ashemen, that the wick and the oil goyrmim sha'er yisachez zman rab adlokazu. The brackets is because different manuscripts have different language, so they combine them all here. So I'll read it with the brackets. So what does it say? So the wick and the oil are the ones that cause that the flame yisachez zman rab adlokazu will hold on for a period of time in this kindling. But omnam ikar adloku ba'ir v'shemen l'chalese. However, the main primary adloka and the kindling and burning of the flame is the light with the oil. Like you said, the oil, he said before, is the ikar adloka. The chalese. Next page, 363. B'she'ivuse, the she'iva, in its drawing, kishenim shechachar apsila, as it's drawing for it, as it's being drawn into the wick. V'apsila ein rak k'mamutza. The psila is only like a mamutza. Again, he's repeating some of the ideas again and again. Is only like an interface, a intermediary liyas hashemen kola al yedei er hasheyava the ein nesref is klal canal, through the oil that is being consumed through the flame that draws from it, and it doesn't get burned up. Canal. Because the primary lighting of the flame is only through the consumption of the oil, not from the consuming of the wick. Is the oil that's being consumed. And when the oil will burn out, will be depleted, the lighting will be over. Will end. And the period of time of this lighting, this burning of the candle, will be only not dependent on the wick, depending how much oil you have. It's another point he emphasizes in its dependence and how critical it is to have. So that's tells you why the halacha is that the shemen is so critical that it should flow into the wick. It's not just about lighting it for a short period of time and burning out, but for this purpose, extended. And then he says in the parentheses, another proof that the flame, that the oil is so important is from from the clarity. That tzlila means how pure the flame burns. If the flame was just with a wick, like he said before, it would flicker, it would sparkle and burn out. Slila means something is burning in a very clear, and like you see when the candle is burning properly, there's I think clear is the right word, clear, crystal, which is only, it's only commensurate to the tzlilus Hashem and dafke. So the shemen, the purer the oil, the purer the flame that will burn from it. Okay, so that's an additional point he's adding in the relationship between the oil and the fire. As I said, all this will come much more alive and understand the details in the nimshal and how the nefesh habamis, which is the oil, will fuel the nefesh alikis, in the fuel of the divine love and fire that's created by it. So this is going to be very critical in the understanding in the nimshal, all the details, how the animal soul becomes part and critical component in the lighting of the Eish Hashem, the fire, the love of God, and V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, which all this is really an introduction to. Okay. So again, the Mittler Rebbe says it many different words, many details. Mostly it's really to help understand it when we learn the nimshal. And of course, this is critical in Ayin Beis because the whole point is understanding how we interface, how we integrate the animal soul into loving God, when the animal soul on its own would seem to be the diametric opposite. But as I said, we'll get there. Just want to make sure that we understand the whole flow here. So that ends this paragraph on top of 363. Then comes the nimshal afterwards. So any questions? I think it's pretty clear, but just in case somebody wants to ask it.
I believe the Rambam says that if the Hanukkah light immediately goes out, you don't have to relight it. So I was just wondering what the halacha is. We don't get the halacha from the Rambam, so what the halacha is, since it's almost Hanukkah, and this is only on it's not on the nimshal, but it's still relevant now. So how long do you have to keep it lit? What's the halacha?
Hanukkah lights? Well, they say 20 minutes, 25 minutes. I mean, it doesn't. First of all, it's not relevant to the discussion. It has to be an extended time, whatever the halacha is. I think there are different opinions. I think the minimum is something like 20 or 25 minutes, if I recall correctly. I didn't look it up now, but how does that change anything? It definitely has to be an extended time, and you can't do that just with a wick.
No, I just brought it up because the Rambam said if it goes out, then you don't have to relight it, and he didn't. And I read it a few days ago.
Was that lechatchila or b'diavad?
Yeah, probably b'diavad, obviously.
Obviously, but it doesn't change. Well, the halacha, the din is achal heves elam eleha. If you light a candle and it burns out right away, you have to light it. You have to keep it. It has to start burning on its own. The question is how long. I don't know what the Rambam says exactly. He says if you light it and it burns out immediately, you can just move on. That's it. I don't think he says that.
No, he says it has to stay lit for about a half hour, which is the amount of time people might linger in the marketplace after Shkia.
Says that about Hanukkah.
Maybe the hadlaka of the menorah and the Beis Hamikdash. I don't know. Good. Okay. There you go. No, but he's saying that if it burns out, you don't have to relight it. I don't know if that means after the half hour or before the half hour.
I don't think it's kosher unless it burns for the half hour. You have to relight it. I think that's the point.
Okay.
I don't know whether you say with the bracha or not. That's a separate issue. But can I ask you a question that relates to the content here?
Sure.
Okay. So first, a comment. I'm curious to hear your comments on my comment. And the second part is a question. The first comment is he, used the word that the candle should burn slowly, ma'at, and he said it a couple times. And you said, and I agree, sort of the Mittler Rebbe style to repeat his point in different ways. I'm wondering if this emphasis on ma'at is essentially talking about, which leads to our next question, that even though both the psila and the shemen are critical, and he explains why you can't have or without both properly, good wick and good shemen. Nevertheless, it seems like there's a little bit more of an emphasis on the shemen, which would be the goof or the nefesh hativis, the human intellect, as we know from the mashal of the nishmas adam, and in the mitzvah that the fuel, the mind or the body, the human should facilitate the performance of the mitzvah. So there seems to be a slight emphasis here, as compared against the Alter Rebbe and as compared against the Rebbe Rashab. It seems like there's a little bit more of an emphasis on the shemen, or let's say on the goof, on our physicality, and or at least our humanity, the human aspect of who we are. The other aspect of it is our neshama. But so that's one comment, is Mahat leaning on the idea that the whole idea is, we want to. The focus is on life. The focus is not just.
I got your question. You don't have to. I got it.
Yeah.
The answer is I'm not going to comment on the nimshal because we didn't learn it yet. So once we learn it in the Mittler Rebbe, how it applies to the animal soul and the body and so on, we can discuss that. Right now, he's only explained the mashal. So I don't want to jump and start speculating. I don't think you're going to find that the Mittler Rebbe is speaking differently than the Alter Rebbe, or that the Rebbe Rashab is different. I think they're all just elaborating on the same points. And the only thing that you can really say at this point is he's actually explaining a halacha. The halacha by Memad Likin talks, even though there is discussion of what kind of wick, but it talks about they're critical that you must have the proper oil, and basically asked the question, why? What's wrong with the wick just burning with the flame? And so the focus here was why the oil. He says, Ikrat loku b'shemen, he says, Yedu b'mishnah, he says the words are, these are the words, and then he goes on and says, by the answer, so he's explaining that halacha in the mashal, and that's why the shemen plays such an important role. But like he also said, you can't do it without the wick. So in the nimshal, I'm not going to discuss right now. That's all going to come later. The Mittler Rebbe is going to obviously explain it, and I'm sure he'll explain the ma'at as well, what he means by that. You could probably speculate what he's going to say, but I don't know if I would come to any conclusions about Mittler Rebbe more emphasizing it than the Alter Rebbe.
Okay.
I think after we finish it, we'll see that the Mittler Rebbe is explaining the Alter Rebbe, not really coming to add something that the Alter Rebbe didn't say, but he's coming to explain it. Like the Gemara explains the Mishnah.
Let me rephrase my question then, just from a really Chassidus applied, Balabatisha, very practical.
Yeah, but I just said I'm not going to comment on the Nefesh Habamishah because the Rebbe, we didn't learn it yet.
I understand.
You want to go there, but I can't go there. I didn't learn it. I don't know what he's going to say.
I see. Okay, fair enough. It's funny how you talked in your interview yesterday. The idea, how you got to be so good at being a choser. The idea of just absorbing and not processing, and just like a baby, just having a blank slate, and how quick the mind is given to want to process and interpret and understand and take a lesson home. And it's just fascinating. Really, you have to train the mind to not do that. I hear you.
Yeah, no, listen. Your question is legitimate, but I just say it's all about timing. We will get to it. The point is all well taken, and we will address it. It's not like you asked me a question from left field. It is the topic, and we were blessed to already have learned it in Torah, in the Alter Rebbe and the Rebbe and the Ayin Beis. So we're all in that same discussion. That's what I'm saying. This is the mashal, and then we're going to get to it. You see, the more you understand the Mittler Rebbe and the mashal, the more we'll understand the nimshal.
Okay,
just a matter of patience.
I was just going to say, I will have the patience. Thank you very much.
And listen, you could always read on, and I'm sure you'll find how he explains it. But as I said, okay, yeah. Actually, it's also the way, when you eat a meal, some people, when you have different dishes on your plate, do you eat the thing you love most, or do you eat it last?
Is that rhetorical, or are you asking me a question?
I'm asking everybody. What's?
I think everybody's different. I mean,
by the way, you're right. It's after a half hour if it goes off. You're right. I missed that. I just reread it. You're right, 100%. So my question was unfounded. Yeah. Thank you very much.
I think most people save the best for last, personally. And I know people that go right for the good stuff right away.
No, that's fine. The reason I brought it up was because the same thing. I actually have a certain, because I train myself, obviously, but I also actually enjoy the process here. Let's hear the mashal, let's dissect it, let's understand it in detail, and then comes the next place. So it's like the best for last. In other words, what the nimshal is, we're going to get there. Okay,
we all want to have take-home points every day, but we can all keep them private for now.
No, it's fine. It's a part of the conversation. It's good. All good.
I was just going to say, from my perspective, there seems to be, I like this ma'at because it's very beautiful. It suggests that the way that the soul interacts with the body and the way that the human interacts with the mitzvah is a lifelong process, and it needs to be continuous, steady. And the more you do it that way, the longer the longer life will be, and the more higher quality life will be. There's a lot of nimshalim here. It's like staring me like really right in the face, and I wanted to try to probe there, but I get it. We're not going there yet right now. I just felt like I had to say something about Maat.
It's fine. It's all good. It's all good. And as you'll see, it's all part of the integration process. Remember yesterday when I gave my overview, I spoke Mamata Lamaila generally is all about internalizing, integrating. Like letting the student digest it slowly, step by step. The digestive process we learned about, if you remember with the Malachim. Malmaila Lamata generally is the other way around. It's giving you such a flash from a higher place, so you're getting like an epiphany, but it's not necessarily contained by you yet. You don't own it. And that's why you really need both. And ultimately, remember the goal, especially as we're learning in Ayin Beis, was Yichud. That we just don't, not just the Nefesh Alikis, you want the Nefesh Abamis, you want the whole being of a person to slowly grow. And we always talk about the step-by-step process of making a dir b'tachtenim. So it's pretty obvious where this is going to go. But again, the details, I would wait till we actually learn it. But we have talked about this at length. It's not like first time that we've talked about integration and internalizing, right? In a previous.
Yeah, 100%. I'm just trying to find these subtle distinctions between the way the Rebbeim are giving it over. But I hear, of course, it's all the same Chassidus. It's slightly different nuances. That's the whole point of each Rebbe has a different approach, slightly different approach to how they give over Chassidus.
Okay, so let's stop here. Stop here. Any other questions?
Well, I can't wait till we learn the nimshal of this. Boy, I can't wait.
We're right next. It's the next section. It's not he's done with the mashal, I think. It's the next section.
So that means that the shaman is the one that makes the oil. So what is the psilo is like the memutza hamachaber. But could you say that the psilo is also part of the oil, or it's not?
I don't know what you mean by that. Without the psila, it wouldn't burn altogether. He said that also. Of course, the psila is necessary.
Right, necessary, but this is not part of the oil. This is necessary to bring.
I don't know what it means part of the oil. It's part of the oil because the oil wouldn't burn if it didn't have a wick. So why is it not part of the oil?
It's not feeding it.
So fine. So you find the exact language that he uses here. So yes, the psila is like the pipe that carries it, and also the psila is what the fire is nechaz ba psila, not ba shemen. Remember, the fire is burning in the wick; it's not burning inside the oil. Anyway, I'm not sure. Are you talking the mashal now? The nimshal? We're not talking about the nimshal now. In the mashal, it's pretty clear. I don't know what to say.
Why do you need the oil? Only otherwise.
Anyway, we just learned it at length. He said it maybe 5 different ways. Why you need the oil? He said because then there's no extended period of burning. It's just going to burn out quickly, and that's that. If you ask me the oil, why you need it, or why you need the wick?
No, if you need the wick and the fire holds.
Anyway, I would suggest just read it again. It's all here. This doesn't need any explanation, in my opinion. It's all here. He says it at least 4 or 5 times in different language. Unless you have a specific question. I'm not sure what you're asking me. You ask me what he says, or do you have a special line in the mimer that you want to understand? I'm happy to explain.
His
asking
that the ikel, oil, is the shaman.
Anyway, why don't you just read what the Mittler Rebbe said and tell me which phrase you have a problem with? I don't know what your question is. You're asking me what he says, or you're asking me to understand what he says?
Oh, to understand, I understand.
Well, tell me what is not understood. Which part?
But
Read to me a line that needs explanation. I'll be happy to explain. Yitzchak, you understand what Reb Shlomo is saying?
I think I understand his question. I was thinking, should I jump in and try and be his lawyer? But I figured he can advocate for himself. I think his question is whether the psila is essentially part of the or. If you can separate the or and the psila,
clearly, is this semantics? It's semantics. What do you mean part of the or? The fire is not the oil, and the fire is not the wick. The fire, there's a wick and there's oil. There's all necessary to produce a candle properly, a pitera. You need all those parts. You're asking me why you need them, or semantics. The oil is also not the fire. Oil is oil, shemen, and oil is oil.
I don't know if he's wants to take it from there to the point of saying, let's say the mitzvah is the psila.
The mitzvah is both a psila and oil. Without it, you don't have a mitzvah.
No, he's saying the lashon. Ikar etzem hadloko shel ha'oil einoi rak mikiloyon hashamesh bilvad veloi mikiloyon hapsilo.
And then he continues to explain the role of the wick. You're reading the part of the role of the oil. A few lines after that, he explains the role of the wick. So
right, but he's saying ikar etzem hadloko.
Okay. Okay, so what's wrong? So what's the problem?
Okay, so I understand you need both, but the main thing, that's what the lotion is kiloyan.
You're asking me, I read the same line. I agree. That's what he says. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Rabbi Jacobson, I have a question, and I'm not sure if this is the proper question to be asked at this time. I know we're discussing this whole Nair situation, but nowhere ever says that this Nair has to be lit. There has to be an outside fire that lights this candle. Do any of the rabbis discuss that aspect and what that stands for?
In the mashal or in the nimshal? Well, in the mashal, if you don't have somebody lighting it,
and we understand that.
Right now, the mashal, you mean, why is he not mentioning the person that's actually lighting the wick?
Not the person, but there has to be not the person. There has to be an outside light of sorts, whether it's a matches, whether it's a lighter, whatever it is, to light that candle. Nobody's discussing that. I'm asking what that's obviously important, because without that, you have none of this stuff matter.
Well, in the mashal, I have no problem. I mean, he's just talking about what makes the fire burn. In the nimshal, it's the ner Hashem nishma sadam. There's a neshama here. A neshama is a flame. The neshama is a part of God, and therefore it has fire in it, and that fire works with the animal soul to ignite it as well. I mean, to me, it's a given that there's a person here that has a fire that he's working with. The fire can be coming from his soul, or the fire can be coming from a mitzvah, their mitzvah. You're asking where the mitzvah gets the fire? So he said it's the mitzvah gets it from Torah. It's the keli to the oir, and the neshama gets it from Hashem, Havaya. So God is the root of all fire. And then these different entities are drawing on that fire and affecting and doing the mitzvah of adlokas haneres. I think that's a given. That's obvious.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think where did he say it? In Torah, he said that's why it's called Eish Oichla. The Eibush is compared to Eish. Learned that, I think, in the Maamorei Alter Rebbe, right? Okay. But that's also a good point that you're bringing up. I think once you understand the nimshal, you understand, where the fire is coming from, the Eish that lights it all. Like the Kohen Gadol, he lights the menorah. We light Shabbos candle, Hanukkah candle, Aveda.
One thing that I know you always tell me I overprocess, but one thing that occurs to me, one of the themes that was discussed that I always go back to it was the 3 types of sweetening, right? And the first level was that it was overwhelmed by the sweetness of the sugar. It wasn't the coffee, let's say, being that. And I think the whole Hamshech started with Naaseh v'Nishma. That means that you have to, in the beginning, have this surge. And when you have that surge, whether it be the initial fire, whether it be initial, and that's what gets everything else going. And then, anyways, that's just the way I don't know if it's even the right thing to say at this point.
Well, it's all connected to the integration, if that's what you're referring to.
Yes.
Yeah, it's connected, but we'll get there. Not discussing that right now, but we'll get there. Yeah.
Yeah, Tiken and Teu and Yaakov and Esav. I mean, it's that whole thing. It's so exciting.
Yeah. Just for the record, this goes on by the Neshama to page 390. So we're now 360, 30 pages before he gets back to Ner Mitzvah. It's a long mimer. Yeah, it's a long mimer. Okay.
We're going to do the whole 30 pages?
Why not?
No, why not? It's great. It's very exciting.
I am Bays. We've come to the edge of the cliff. We've nowhere to go. Trying to create a proper landing for Ayin Bays. That's really the whole goal here. To get it back into the Shemen. Integrated, right?
100%. Very exciting stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Reb Simon, he brought before one line, Kemoi ho'ei shenechas bo'etz. If you're taking a tree and the fire burns, you don't need oil. Because
I mentioned that before, yeah.
Psilo is a very thin thing. That's why you need the oil. So again, it's not the oil in a psilo you need the oil.
That was his question. That was his question. L'cheda ein zeh muvan. He asked this question himself. He said, L'cheda ein zeh muvan. So just like by a piece of wood, what do you care about the oil? That's what he asked. The Rebbe Mittler Rebbe asked that very question. And then he answered it. He asked, why do you need the shemen? Why can't you just have the wick? Like the piece of wood.
So the shemen is holding the psilo.
Why don't you just read it inside? What can I tell you? You're asking me, the Mittler Rebbe himself says this. Unless there's a line in the mimer that you don't understand,
you can't say
read inside. He answers this very question.
Saw it inside. I just saw it inside. Why can't you say?
Show me the line that you're having a problem with. Read me a line, and tell me what the problem with that line is. Because I don't. To me, it sounds like you're asking me what he says, not to understand what he says.
I don't have
what line is a problem? What line do you have an issue? When he answers the question, he asks this question about why the oil, and then answers it. Why the Ikar Adlok is b'shemen. He explains it in detail. So what part of what he says is not clear?
Before he said, I don't have a book. Before he said, Teva ho'eish lechalo is dovor shene'echaz boy.
Anyway, so I'm asking you, when he answers the question, what he then answers that very question you're asking. He asked this question. So I'm asking you in the answer, you don't have the book. So maybe, I don't know, maybe show him what, let him see the lines.
I have it. Rabbi Yitzchok said, I have it, but not the book in front of me. Elo tzorich lo yomar bo zeh, דעיקר ההדלוקה הוא בשמן ולא היא בפסילו.
And then
Why
then he goes on to explain. Yeah.
מה שהאוהל הוא שואב את השמן בפסילו, ומכלה אויסוי מעט מעט, זהו עיקר סיבס עיכוב ההדלוקה. So why can't we say that the psilo is the one that is holding? Well, the psilo is too gentle, so you need the shaman to hold the psilo.
You're asking a question on what the Mitzvah Rebbe is saying?
Yeah, the same way that
I don't understand your question. I don't understand your question.
The same way that the wood, if it's a big chunk of wood,
But why don't you continue reading? Continue reading. Anyway,
No.
Honestly, I think what's interesting here is I think he's asking the same question I asked, which you said we're not going there, which we're not going to the nimshal. I think
he's not asking that. He's asking on the mushal. He's not asking on the nimshal.
No, but he seems to be putting the dagesh on the shemen, which was the nature of my question, even though he's saying it very differently.
Okay, so listen, discuss it. I don't know. I don't know what the question is.
I'm okay waiting. I'm not.
I don't think he's talking about the nimshal. He doesn't understand the mushal. You're not. Okay. He's not asking what you asked.
Okay. Well, I can't get in his head any more than I try.
He wants to say the wick and the oil is secondary. That's what he's trying to say. Mitzvah Rebbe doesn't say that. I don't know what to say.
I'm trying to understand. I'm not saying. I'm trying to understand. The Mitzvah Rebbe is saying that the oil is the main thing. My question is, why can't you say that the psilo is the main thing? The oil is holding the psilo.
Okay, so let me say this. My recommendation as a teacher: read the whole thing after we finish this class on your own till the end of the paragraph on page 363. Read it slowly, and then tomorrow tell me if you still have this question.
Thank you.
Let's try that. Why not? You can wait till tomorrow, right? Unless you tell me you can't sleep tonight. We can wait till tomorrow, really. I would suggest reading it. Not just the beginning.
There is a shach that is expressing something like that. He had a question and he couldn't fall asleep the whole entire night until he found the answer. Only in the morning. If you can't fall
asleep, call me. If you can't fall asleep,
you're not sleeping.
If you can't fall asleep, call me. That's what I recommend. Read it. And tomorrow's class, Mitzvah Hashem, I'll ask you if you still have a question. By all means, we'll answer. We'll try to explain.
You're a much kinder professor than they have at Stanford. If you called a professor at Stanford after work hours, he'd probably kick you out of the class.
Well, that professor may also be marching with Hamas for all we know.
Unfortunately, that's probably true.
By the way, Reb Simon, it's becoming more and more complicated. We have such a... Would you be able to say something about that?
About what?
About what's going on now. As more that you're giving in, you're more dependent on them, and there's no end to it.
I speak about it every day on my videos.
What's right?
Rob Shlomo, we can't hear you.
Wait till the class stops recording, and then we can talk about it. But not.
Okay, let me stop the recording right now. We're on top of page 363. We finished the paragraph on top 363.